Welcome to another episode of The Disruptors, where we're arming you with the tools you need to innovate within the physical therapy space by highlighting those who have come before you. I'm your host, Stephen Cohen. Now, let's get into it. Everybody, welcome back to the Disruptors podcast, where we are highlighting people who are disrupting the physical therapy industry for the better. Today, I'm joined by Ricky Overton. Ricky and I have worked together for, 6 months now. But if you count when we started talking, closer to like 18,
Yes.
getting closer to 2 years. I have been so impressed by your determination to get your company paid. I have been so impressed by just your knowledge of the rev cycle space and how you can do different things across different payers, and whether it's motor vehicle, whether it's work comp, whether it's commercial Medicare Advantage, and the understanding. So I'm extremely excited to have you on today because I want to pick your brain and give others who may be struggling more on the rev cycle side, both generally, but also specifically for the remote therapeutic monitoring codes, a chance to hear it from somebody who, as I've seen across, we'll call it hundreds of examples, a beacon on a hill, we'll call it. And hope that doesn't make you blush too hard. But with that, Ricky, I'd love if you wouldn't mind giving a just quick little intro on yourself, and then we'll get into it.
I've been doing rev cycle now for about 13 years. Started from the bottom up and worked all the way up to director of revenue cycle. So we've gone through hard knocks to get here, and through the trenches. And through those each steps, I've had great mentors and people sharing knowledge. And that's been the key to the success, is sharing the knowledge and the one-offs to learn from. I'm with a startup right now. We have 2 clinics, getting ready to open 2 more clinics this year, and hopefully 2 more by the end of the year. We're shooting for. So we're a growing company and building processes and trying to streamline revenue cycle to the best we can, and ultimately to get patient care.
I love that and appreciate that so much. And you know what led you to the world of rev cycle? If you wouldn't mind giving a little bit of the why behind it. And I know this, but I think it's worth everyone else knowing as well.
So I come from the hospitality industry. I owned a restaurant and a nightclub, sold them, and I had a young daughter and decided that I needed a 9-to-5 job. And I figured medical billing would be around indefinitely. So I got my foot in the door and started verification, learning that process, and took it from there. So, soaked up all the knowledge I could. I had great mentorships. I had great people helping direct me, teaching me different aspects of it. And then I had a few key people that moved me through different departments in revenue cycle, so I could learn the whole life of a claim from start to end, even to the refund in the process. So that really what led me to revenue cycle. Then I found that it's very interesting, and it's never dull, and it's a challenge every day.
And so you get to keep fresh, keep challenged, and keep fighting. As you look at okay, you started with a clean slate with Inspired, right? Like you got to set all the processes and everything from day one. What are maybe 1 or 2 things that you knew, like, I am not letting this part go awry? Or what are 1 or 2 things that, what are the mission, what you would call mission statement or foundational things that were?
So the first thing was to change the mentality of what we do. So we really are a billing company that offers PT. That's really what we do. that's unique in the industry to think that way, but that's really what we're doing. Um, that and then where revenue cycle starts. That was probably one of the biggest points. Revenue cycle doesn't start when it comes back to the billing department. Revenue starts at the first point of contact with the patient. So that's your front desk calling the patient, getting them scheduled, getting all that critical data, their name, their legal name, what's on their insurance, their driver's license, all that stuff. Is this due to an accident? Getting all that up front gives your success rate a better chance. Um, if you don't get that information, you're behind the eight ball and you're digging out of a hole. So if we can get that faster, then we're more successful and we get it clean. So we have checks and balances. So that was probably the third thing, was that we have a check and balance system. So our front desk gets that information. Then as we verify the insurance, we're double checking all the data in the system. So we're checking name, date of birth, all that information that's critical for a claim to get paid. We're making sure that goes through. And then we parcel the benefits aspect to it to an authorization team that are specialized in authorizations. That's all their focus is versus doing verification and authorization. They're just focused on their. So we learn the nuances to an authorization. Like, can we really submit this at the 8th visit to keep the patient continuing treating? Or what codes do we really have to submit to get this off? How fast is time to approval? Then we can move it all out. So all those were my key factors into the process of revenue cycle as we started. And I built those prior, so that helped.
So you had that strong foundation and a playbook, if you will, going into Inspired, which then when you get a brand new team, right, and in a brand new field, it's easier and harder, right? I'm sure there's both things there. And so when the remote therapeutic monitoring codes came out, would you mind talking me through just your journey with hearing about them, investigating them, and kind of just how you thought about it? I would love to hear how you thought about it.
So my first thing was I just heard about them, and then I started researching it. And then I'm thinking of how I interact with my primary care. Now, he's a neighbor, so I have a little bit of interaction with him. But I could text him and say, hey, we need a refill for XYZ. And how that communication worked. Or like on a Saturday, send me going to a walk-in clinic. I'd be like, hey, I have a sinus infection. Can you prescribe me something? That interaction makes it you feel more secure with your provider. You feel more at home. You feel like he's a buddy,
Yep.
in my case, because you have that interaction. Now, not all providers are this way, but I loved it. It made me feel comfortable and gave me more trust. So when RTM came out, I was like, man, this is amazing. But before RTM came out, you could call your doctor, but that could be a $35 charge, whatever, or even more. Or you have to set up a telehealth visit. And that is the future we saw in COVID. It worked. So why physical therapy during COVID really jumped into telehealth, because that was their only choice. So why remote therapy, RTM, why wouldn't that work? Like, if I could, me as a patient, I've had a broken collarbone, had physical therapy. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't good at home exercises. I'm not that good of a patient. So, but if I had someone hold me accountable versus just twice a week, I would have probably been more likely to do all my home exercises, or at least be on top of them.
Yep.
Which would have gotten my care better, I would think, actually, if that's the way to say it. Or it would have shortened it, maybe. And that's the thing. I wouldn't have to be doing 8 weeks of care or 6 weeks of care. I could be doing 4 weeks of care and being over and done with it. for your schedule, sometimes it's hard to get into PT.
Yeah.
So with that, I was like, man, RTM, that's great. Then I had to sell it to my team. That was the hard part. It's new. People don't like change. I understood. I felt like maybe 20% of how it worked and what it did and what it was for. But then I had to keep researching, keep throwing through. Then I did research with insurances, like who's paying this besides Medicare? How are they paying it? What do we have to do? What hoops do we have to jump through to get it paid? So I started researching this as long as communicating with you, asking you probably a ton of questions, and probably picking your brain way more than you wanted to deal with me. But then when I got a good handle of it, it gave me a better selling proposal to my leadership team and to implement this. I see this kind of remote therapy management the way healthcare is going. There's going to have to be more hands-on, but really hands-off kind of thought pattern, because, like I said, I'm not a good patient, but if I had that accountability, I probably would have been a better patient.
Yeah.
And probably I wouldn't have gone 8 weeks. I would have probably cut it shorter. But I didn't have that. And I think that was a miss on my treatment. And I'm speaking as me as a patient.
Right.
But I think the outcome could have came faster if I had done my own therapy and been held accountable. And that would have saved up time. Time is money, freedom, all that, life itself. So that's kind of how, and then I started diving into insurances. That's the crazy part of it. How do we do it? Who's going to pay for this? Why aren't they paying for it? Is it experimental in these plans? Like, can you get a letter of determination if they're covered? Can you do all these little steps to see if you can get them paid? Some insurance companies act like they've never heard of it. Whatever the case scenario there. So it's just moving the pieces. It's a slow process, but just filtering, and it's test. It's trial and error, basically. It may work, it may not, but can you shuffle to make it work? Or this one is a loss. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to make those decisions right then and there, because it may not be worth keep trying. So that's kind of the process.
Yeah, I mean, the submit and see, right, is unfortunately the best way. It's not a statement I like making, but like it's like, well, what happens if they have like $100 left on their deductible? Like, what happens then? I'm like, for what payer? Like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. Like, okay, well, there's so many other questions. Like, I don't know. And
I think that's where a lot of people struggle. That was one of our struggle. Like, is it going to cost the patient more money? And that's a huge factor. But I'm revenue cycle. I'm not a clinician, so I don't have that thought pattern. My thought pattern is I go to see my primary care and he says, oh, you need a shot. I don't say, how much is that shot? I get the shot. So in this industry, I find that's a hard sell, because they are worried about, like, is this going to cost the patient? But ultimately, most providers that I've found in this space, they're communicating with their patient outside of work. So you don't get paid much in physical therapy. And I think I've told you, I use this as my negotiation tactic, is that, can you get a refrigerator repairman for that rate?
Yeah. And
good luck. When you get that person to come out to your house, then I'll take that rate. But you can't, So we got to get these therapists paid what they deserve. And I'm not saying they got to make $500,000 or anything like that. I'm saying get paid for what you're worth. So if you're already doing this, you should be getting paid for it. A doctor's not doing it without getting paid.
Yep.
99% of the time. So therapists should have the mindset they should be getting paid for what they do. And RTM gives you that piece that was missing. In my past life, I've heard, therapists giving out their cell phone number, giving their email address, and they are spending an hour at night texting back patients or emailing patients.
Yep.
Well, there's no charge to that. I mean, I think some have made it where it's a charge the next visit, but do it legitimately.
Yeah.
Don't cross the line or walk that line. And this gives you that opportunity, and you still get to do the maintenance care, or not, I shouldn't say maintenance care, but the care that the patient deserves, and you can help them on the spot. So twice a week, that leaves 3 other days they're wide open doing their own thing. And this way, it kind of gives them a communication piece that they can react to, the therapist can react to. So,
well, I think you nailed it. You hit the nail on the head there and what we've seen in our own outcomes research, right, is there is a likelihood that there will be fewer visits required. And if your copay is $40 to $60, right, which is probably the average for a commercial plan these days, like, hey, there's a chance that you will need 1 or 2 fewer visits. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, okay, well, if this service, this additional modality, is only going to cost me potentially like $12 after, like, with my coinsurance, but I could save a visit. Like, when do you not want to play the game of you give me 12 and I'll give you 50? Like,
right. Right.
Yeah, and not even including like all the other resources required to go to a physical therapy appointment, right? We talk a lot about the willingness to resource curve, which is basically the willingness to pay curve, but a willingness to resource in terms of going to a physical therapy appointment. And you got to think of, okay, not only is there driving, parking, depending upon the person's job, carving out what needs to probably be 90 minutes can be difficult, right? Sometimes even 120, depending upon traffic and everything else. And then, do they have a family? I know this is more me speaking as a patient. And I appreciate you giving your patient experience as well. Like, if I do it in the morning, which is easiest for work, well, then my wife has to take my son to daycare, or our son to daycare. And that's kind of my job, especially when I'm in town, is like, I take care of the morning. So now I have to ask her to do that. So there's a unit of value that I'm having to trade or expend to be able to go to that appointment. Or it's okay, now I got to block off 2 hours in my afternoon. Like, yeesh, that's tough, especially where our business is today. And anyway, it's enough on that. But I completely agree with you on that piece. Is and where I really scratch my head is when I onboard a practice and I hear that, like, oh, well, I don't want the patient to pay more. And then I see a laser and a sign that says $50 cash for laser. I'm like, help me understand this, which I think is to the point where clinicians are still coming to the conclusion that this is helpful, right? They've read the research, they believe the laser works. Okay, and now I think it's really just a belief, right? On a belief. It's not are they really afraid their patients are going to pay more? Potentially, because they might hear about it. Or is it, I don't know if they'll get the ROI. The patient will get the ROI on their money. I think it's more the latter, but that's just a non-patient taking a wild guess.
Right. And I think that is a struggle, because physical therapy, because you do so many treatments, it's a heavy cost to a lot of patients.
Yep.
And that out-of-pocket money, they've had surgery, they've already spit out a bunch of money. Now they're coming to PT and they may not have a high deductible, so they have more money. So you lose that patient because of financial, because they think they're spitting out all this money. And I get that thought pattern, but I'm really a believer, after multiple surgeries I've had, because I'm old, but and seeing the outcome that I've gotten from PT has made my life better, but it's a hard sell. And I'm in the industry, so I see it with patients. But what is hard to do is to get that person that's never had PT and they're doing it and they're like, I'm at 5 visits and I feel I'm at 60%. I feel pretty good. I can move my arm. I can do the rest of this at home. Really? Probably not, because they're not going to do it.
Yep.
They may do it the first week, but after that, they're probably going to fade off like a normal person.
Yep.
So they need that interaction with the therapist. They need that skill for them to get better. And to get there, you have to sell this. But this is another tool in the toolbox.
Yep.
So RTM is another tool you can use to get that patient better. And that's a plus. As more tools that we have at our fingertips ultimately leads to better care. And that's the goal for any practice. There's no secret sauce to what we do. It is you're trying to get a patient better. You're trying to get them back to a normal standard of living.
Yep.
And if I have 3 tools or I have 100 tools, I'd rather have 100 tools and give patients options than have 3 tools and this is the only options you got. Not everything works for everybody. So you got to have that flexibility. And this gives you that point. And that's where I was a huge believer in it. And looking at the studies, looking at our conversations, or taking what we've shared with each other and putting it all together, it was a no-brainer for me. Like, this is something we have to do. And we're small, but we want to grow big. So eventually this is going to become more prevalent across the industry, I believe. I'd rather have all our bugs worked out and we've got it fine-tuned and we're doing it than coming later on and 20 of our competitors already had this, is one thing. The second thing is, man, our reviews are outstanding. And I think part of that is the care we offer and the personal touch, but our team gives us that personal touch.
I appreciate that very much. And as we see ourselves evolving as a company and learning, we have started to put this out there, and it's resonated quite well, which is Sarah is a relationship operating system, right? You have your EMR, you have your rev cycle tech, you have your ERP for knowing what what money's going out and coming in and all of that. Mm-hmm. Then you need a relationship operating system, right? Because that's what your clinicians develop with their patients. And so, yeah, I that's what we're seeing is like, what does Sarah do? And okay, well, text patients. Like, okay, well, that's not fun. Like, I mean, that's cool, I guess, but like, oh, well, they make RTM really easy. Like, okay, well, that's nice. Like, we'd like to do that. But I think more and more it's coming down to, we help make a stronger relationship with less effort on the PT.
Yes. So I was always told because I was new to PT in my previous life. So it takes about 3 visits to get a patient to buy in and trust the therapist. So that's based on those touch points at the appointment. So now if you have those touch points outside of the appointment, the text message, does that increase the buy-in from the patient? Because ultimately that's what it takes. And they have to be compliant to the plan of care and all that. So if we're pushing more touch points in the office and outside the office, that's more buy-in. So our outcomes, so ultimately that benefits the patient, of course, for getting better. But also that benefits the therapist because we're learning stuff from the patient through that text message that we may never have gained. Unless you're doing it on the side, with your personal phone or email.
Which shouldn't be doing for a variety of reasons.
But this gives you those extra touch points to make that sale and that buy.
Thank you for listening to this episode. This would not be possible without the sponsorship of Sarah Health. Sarah is the relationship operating system for physical therapy practices, driving better patient outcomes, improved arrival rate, and improved financial margins. If you'd like to learn more, check them out at Sarah, S-A-R-A health.com, sarahhealth.com. And if you'd be interested in advertising with us and helping us produce even more great stories, please let us know at steven@sarahhealth.com. Now, back to the episode. Let's take a shift more to the nuts and bolts on the rev cycle side, right? So you've done the submit and see, the letter of determination, had some discussions around experimental, right, and being deemed experimental. I'd love you to walk me through the general process, and then let's take, just for the RTM codes, and let's take a couple examples that that differ, right? So I'd love you to walk me through a couple.
So basically, when I started this process, I started looking at how do we get it paid. Like there's not a ton of information out there that says, oh, we're going to pay this. No. It's not like they post on their website, hey, we pay RTM codes. If they do, it's in the fine print on page 1001, and usually it's blurred out for whatever reason. You're never going to find it, basically.
Yep.
So now you have to do your research. And some of it's just trial and error. Do we bill it? And see what they do. Like, do they leave the patient fully responsible for full bill charges? Then you start thinking that process through, like, what are you going to do with the patient? Like, are you going to bill them? That's your internal decision making. But then you go to the insurance and say, okay, they came back, they left the patient responsible, or they denied it. One of the two factors. So why did they deny it? Code, it's not listed, it's not on the fee schedule, whatever. But then you take it from there. So payers have experimental codes sitting out there all the time. And I experienced this lesson through a personal experience with my daughter. So it was trial and error in that situation, but this taught me a lot in the process. So what I did was I got hold of a medical director, went to them directly, and I started saying, okay, I need a letter of determination. And so I give the codes. And they'll be like, well, you can't do this. You can't do that. And then they'll come back and be like, well, we're not going to cover this because it doesn't fall in this scope, which, whatever reason, it may not fall in physical therapy scope, but does it fall in your health benefits? Like, where does it fall? Like, does it fall anywhere? So then you have to dive into the policy. Now, that's difficult because the people you talk to read a script. So then you have to push it up. So you have to you may go through the benefits team, then you may go through authorization team, then you go to a medical director, and then you basically go and keep pushing until you get to someone that may know something or can interpret a little bit of a piece. Then you have to go back and fight that. So if you get the answer you're looking for or a piece of the answer, you just take that piece and then you use it to fight for that code per se. So like with the initial setup code, that's pretty easy to bill for. But what are you setting up? So like some payers look at it like, what are you really setting up? You're not setting them up. Medicare says anything. I mean, basically. Yeah, it's kind of a wide spectrum for Medicare. So you have to use what Medicare says to Blue Cross, but Blue Cross may say, are you setting them up on video? Are you setting them up? What are you setting up? Oh, you're just putting their number in the system? That doesn't count. That's what I heard at first. But then when I started going off of what Medicare was saying and talking to Blue Cross, they were like, yeah, we pay that guy. And it was like, oh, so you're telling me this? I've been through hours of going through on the phone with everybody. I think I even talked to the janitor. And to get to that point, and they're like, oh, yeah, Medicare sees it this way, we pay it this way. So learning their terminology, that's the other key thing, is learning their terminology and how they perceive this code to work. Because it's black and white. What you offer us from Sarah Health is pretty black and white, and that's pretty the common. But to another payer, it's foreign to them if they've never heard of it. Some people have never heard of it. I mean, we went through an authorization. So American Specialty, I'll put it out there on the podcast. They're awful. And let that be known. And they never heard of the codes. They acted like we were making stuff up. And we went to 3 medical directors, and then one out of the 3 knew what the code was, the codes. And I actually emailed him Medicare, all Medicare's information. And they never heard of it. So we're still fighting that battle. So a lot of it, again, is trial and error. A lot of it is determining how do you jump through the hoops with the payer. If that's a letter of determination, is it to push experimental codes? So do you push it towards the experimental? We know in this industry, dry needling was looked on like, oh, we're not paying this. A lot of people pay it. It's just going to take that time to get people on board or get it added to their fee schedule. And that's a tough battle in this industry. But I think we're seeing it. We're seeing more people jump on board with this payers. It's just finding the right terminology, how to jump through the hoops, and what codes do you really want to use? Like out of those codes, like you may not always hit the 16 responses. So press on the initial setup code and try to get that out as much as you can of anything. And the 16s, I call it icing on the cake. If you hit that code, great. The other codes, that's just a birthday present you didn't expect. And those are harder to hit.
They require clinician time. It's a whole other thing.
So those 2 codes are your bread and butter. And your initial setup is really your bread, and then the 16 responses is your butter. But if you can get 1 out of the 2, you're doing better than you were, because that's a little bit more revenue coming in, but ultimately it's leading to the better care of the patient. So if you can get the buy-in and get the 16 codes, it's a plus all the way around revenue cycle and patient care. So you're getting a 2 for 1, basically. You're winning in revenue, you're winning in the care of the patient.
Absolutely. And as you know, there's no shortage of need for PT, right? No one we work with is having trouble filling their schedule. In fact, most people have 1 to 6 week wait list to be able to get someone in. And that has all sorts of negative impacts, both patients and business side of things. And so whenever I hear anyone say like, oh, but like they may be done in fewer visits. Like, is that really a problem? Like, you can't say I'm worried about fewer visits and then say I have a 2-week wait list. Like those can't exist.
So ultimately, you know, a lot of it's because of the rates is volume. So if you free up your schedule and you have someone to fill it, you're not losing.
Exactly.
You're winning on that piece. On top of that, you're filling that schedule. You're getting someone in faster, getting them care, but you're bringing in extra revenue with the RTM codes. So if the next patient does the exact same thing, you're shortening your wait time. So as a revenue cycle, you're processing your patients faster and getting them better and having better outcomes at a shorter period of time, which means you're seeing more patients in the long run. And it's not over the volume. Let's just say you average 11 patients. That's the max you can handle. So you're not pushing to have 16 patients to meet the volume you need. You're still getting that volume. Plus you're getting extra revenue that you didn't account on because we know the rates stink. So this just builds your cash flow coming in to help, even though it's a small amount. But if you could do that every patient, that your net per visit, NPR and NPV, whatever it is, abbreviation, you're increasing that. Instead of having a $88 one, you may have a $100 one because you have that RTM coming in now.
Yep.
So that only gives you more benefits. That may mean extra staff, another table, a new e-stem, a laser.
A laser. I mean, more continuing ed, right? Like, instead of doing this thing virtually, now we can actually afford to bring in somebody in person or send people out to conferences. Like, yeah, you know what? Like, Lauren, we can send you to CSM now because like this has been great for everybody. And so, yeah, we'll actually pay for your travel to go out there. Whatever that is.
Yeah. So there's tons of benefits in it, and there's tons of the way you look at it. You got to refocus your thought pattern of how you're looking at it. Yes, there's a cost to it. There's a cost to everything, but you're also getting a 2-for-1. You're getting more revenue in, you're getting patient care, and you're getting them better sooner. So that only frees up your schedule to bring in more patients and getting care. And as your demographics grow and your population grows, that only serves your community better.
Absolutely. And, in the last 3 to 5 minutes here together, as you think about some of the folks, thank you so much for being willing to talk with them, whether customers or potential customers on the Sarah side, that they're worried about the rev cycle piece, they're worried about it counting as a visit, right? They're worried about all of those things that shouldn't be a concern, once they experience it, right? It's like a fear of the cold water before you get in. What are maybe 1 to 2 things that you're hearing a lot of that are just misunderstandings, that if you could wave a magic wand, you'd wish everyone would just stop believing about RTM?
So one of the biggest thing is that you have max visits in a lot of policies, or your authorization has 12 visits, whatever the case scenario. That RTM, if you build it outside of the visit, counts as a visit. It does not. Because you're not physically having them in the office. It does not go against them. Your EMR system may count it as a visit, but it's not a visit towards the payer. So that's one misunderstanding completely. And so that hampers a lot of people on the revenue side and cycle side and the therapist side. We don't want to go against, they may need that visit. The second thing is it's difficult. Like, if you go with the right people, so like we chose Sarah, it's not difficult. They make it easy for you. Basically, it's an email for them. It's the simplest form you can possibly do, and it doesn't make it hard on revenue cycle or billing in itself. It's really simple, and that is where I think those 2 things scare people.
Yep.
And is how it's going to be hard to bill. I'm going to fraudulently bill, and we'll be in trouble. No, they make it simple. And then the visit, it's not going against your visit count to the patient's policy or the authorization. If you can get over those 2 things, ultimately you're going to give better care. You just got to bite the bullet and jump in. And yes, you're not going to get paid every time, but you're not going to get paid every visit either. So that's part of it. And just that's part of the industry. It's part of dealing with insurance. And you just got to go in it and get everybody to buy in. And it's not that hard. It's really easy.
I appreciate that so much. You've given a lot of very good tactical advice. So understanding especially learning your terminology by payer, and knowing that you've sometimes got to ping, kind of like pinball around within the organization to get an answer. I share your share your lack of love for Ash. Yeah, very. they're on the naughty list, as well as a couple of the Blues plans and some others. That luckily Tennessee is a really solid state for RTM, based on what we've seen across the state for reimbursement. And I think they just get it right. Like, United is one of the best payers for this across the nation, as we see. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's a coincidence that United also owns an orthopedic surgery center or two and a physical therapy group, and they're paying for it. Like, I don't think that's a coincidence that they did that. And so to finish up, I think, to bring back one of your earlier points, there's a lot of reason for optimism on adoption being full blown at some point. Right? Because that's just the process, right? Medicare puts it out, and it takes a bit from there for everyone else to adopt. But in general, there's a likelihood of 90+% adoption, I think, over the course of the next, it's April of 2024. I'd imagine by 2026 that we see the laggards adopt. Now, granted, I'm optimistic by nature, but Ricky, anything else before we called it a day?
No, I mean, I think it's worth a trial, and once you do it, it's worth it. If it's not just financial, it's worth for the patient care. I mean, ultimately, that's what it's there for, and it does serve that purpose.
I appreciate that. Well, Ricky, thank you very much for being on today. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Disruptors. I hope that you were able to take one or two things away that you can apply immediately to your own innovation journey. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Cohen. This is sponsored by Sarah Health. Let's keep moving.